There are stories so powerful, they grip the world in an electric spell of fascination.
It's gonna hit!
For nearly a century, the story of the Titanic disaster has mesmerized us all.
Let's stretch your legs.
Tonight, follow director James Cameron on his quest to find a human drama more powerful than fiction, deeply embedded in the reality of the past.
You give us a chance to live! Stay back! Stay back, the lot of you!
Hear chilling accounts from real-life survivors of the disaster.
The horror of people drowning is something that no one could possibly tell you.
Frankly, I wanted it to be more terrifying.
Lock the gates!
Learn the truth about the mysteries and controversies of the sinking.
That ship broke in half as it sank. I am convinced of it. I know it's true. That's the way we saw it.
But this ship can't sink. I assure you, she can't.
Go deeper inside the wreck of the real Titanic than anyone has ever been.
We're going to work our way back to you where we can photograph that action. We're going to give it one try.
Also see the lost scenes from the film, exclusive footage cut from Cameron's final version.
We have to go back!
No, and I'm in charge of this boat, madam.
Tonight, go on the decks of Titanic and experience its power like never before.
When my father said to my mother that the ship was alleged to be unsinkable, her reply to that was, well, that is flying in the face of God.
So this is the ship they say is unsinkable.
It is unsinkable. God himself could not sink this ship.
The actual story of the Titanic, what happened in 1912, how the disaster came to be, just became endlessly fascinating to me. You couldn't have written it better. It's like a great novel. It's like a great novel that really happened.
It's 1912. The Titanic is the largest moving object ever built by man. This is her maiden voyage. The celebrated captain is planning to retire after completing the journey. Among the passengers are some of the wealthiest people in the world and some of the poorest. Hopeful immigrants in search of a new life. The ship steams across the North Atlantic at nearly top speed. An iceberg sits directly in her path. The collision mortally wounds the ship. There are only enough lifeboats for half the people on board. 1,500 souls are lost. The world is shocked. The confidence of an age is shattered.
To me, it was such a dynamic story, and, you know, I've always been interested in the ocean. So there was a certain transition point where I realized I was heading toward making a film on that subject.
The story of the Titanic is legendary. To tell the real story, Cameron knows he must separate fact from fiction. And for him, the only way to begin is to come face to face with the real Titanic. In 1995, he sets off to the North Atlantic to embark on a series of groundbreaking dives with the help of Dr. Anatoly Sagalevich and the Russian research vessel, the Keldysh.
The Keldysh is probably the most capable deep-sea research system in the world, and the fact that they have two submersibles makes this system really the finest interspace system around.
For close to a month, the vessel sits at the very spot where the Titanic went down and becomes home to a unique group of scientists and filmmakers who battle the forces of nature as they dive to the ocean floor. It's a mission to shoot film in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. The Titanic lies 2.5 miles below the ocean's surface. At such a depth, the water exerts a pressure of 6,000 pounds per square inch, enough to squeeze an ordinary styrofoam cup into the size of a thimble.
People have shot the Titanic previously with IMAX, but the IMAX camera was inside the submersible looking out through the porthole, and I didn't want to be limited to that. I wanted to have my camera outside in the water to get the most vista.
But no camera system exists that can withstand the crushing weight of the ocean depths. So engineer Mike Cameron and Panavision combined forces to build their own. The specialized camera, however, can only hold about 12 minutes of film, and once a dive is underway, it cannot be reloaded. Not a single frame of film can be wasted, so the submersible team must rehearse before every dive.
We commissioned a model of the wreck that was put together to the best of everybody's knowledge of what the wreck looked like, and we would do dry test runs of the shot in smoke, heavy smoke, and I would get the Russian sub-pilots to move their little toy subs the way they were going to move their big subs, because they knew how to drive subs, but they didn't understand the shots necessarily, what the shots consisted of. And you make sure that if you can see us, then the shot is good. If you can't see us, the shot's no good. Okay. Want to go dive? Yes. Okay.
To get all the shots they plan, Cameron's team must dive to the Titanic 12 times. Each round-trip dive takes at least 16 hours to complete. Just getting to the bottom involves a 2-hour free fall. Inside the submersibles, there's nothing to do but wait. The space is cramped. The temperature drops in the frigid waters. And the ultimate destination is pitch black. Only the lights of the submersibles can reveal the secrets that lie here.
Okay, slow down. The bow should be exactly, it should be dead ahead. Look at that, bingo. Check it out, there's Titanic.
Yes, there's Titanic.
Okay, we're gonna go for a shot. Ready, and action, action.
Action, action. It was a pretty amazing experience. Just 10 feet away was the most famous shipwreck in the world.
We're going to work our way back to you and see if we can get into a position where we can photograph that action. We're going to give it one try.
Roger that. Like a couple of New York taxi cabs, we'd be talking back and forth, trying to carefully choreograph and to shoot specific master shots.
The first couple of dives were so intensely focused to get to the shots that we had designed and drawn. The first couple of dives I was getting garbage because I wasn't dealing with the ship on its own terms. I didn't go there and let the Titanic talk to me. And so it was at the end of the second dive. I was back on the support ship and I was alone in my cabin, and I just started to cry. It just sort of hit me, the whole tragedy of what happened to Titanic. So on some of the later dives, I abandoned my plan, because I sort of wasn't getting what I wanted anyway, and what I was getting was much more interesting. And we had this ROV that we had built, which was just supposed to be an on-camera prop. It was just supposed to be launched from the sub and just kind of tootle around, and then we'd haul it back in by its cable. But it had a camera on it, and it could go inside the ship, and nobody had ever done that.
On the last 2 dives, Cameron's team sends the ROV deeper into the ship than any remote vehicle has ever gone. It reveals a series of ghostly images. These views of the wreck have never before been seen.
The doors, these sort of swinging doors that have these ornate wrought iron screens in them, that stuff's still there. It's still preserved. There is still this elegance, the ghost of this elegance. There were these beautiful cut crystal chandeliers just hanging there in the midst of these stalactites formed by the rust formations, where you just thought you were in some sort of strange grotto someplace. Almost like it looked like a natural formation with a chandelier there. These rooms, they were called the Millionaire Suites. We went into the one that was reserved for J.P. Morgan. To be able to go into that room and see that marble fireplace still sitting there, and to be able to compare our video with a period photograph of the time and look at the veining in the marble and realize it's the same thing. It was like a fingerprint. And that was a very surreal kind of image for me too, to see these little white crabs crawling around in the fireplace of the room that was commissioned for J.P. Morgan.
Cameron's dives to the real Titanic ultimately provide the production with more than just footage for his movie.
We were bringing something back from the wreck that the world could share without touching it or disturbing it in any way. We were bringing back images. And certainly for me personally, but for us, the production collectively, that after that point, everything else had to live up to that level of authenticity. You have to keep what happened there in the back of your mind at all times.
I saw the iceberg, and I see it in your eyes.
There were moments when it just got too eerie.
Is there anyone alive out there?
My mother said, Well, if there are ice floes, might there not be icebergs?
It is a time in history when men hold their machines above the powers of nature, and each social class knows its place. The Titanic is a symbol of her time, a dangerous blend of optimism and arrogance.
I don't see what all the fuss is about. It doesn't look any bigger than the Mauritania.
You could be blasé about some things, Rose, but not about Titanic.
Director James Cameron has to go beyond merely telling the story of a ship on a tragic voyage. He must create an emotional window into the past that will bring history to life like never before. His eyes and ears are two fictional characters from opposing worlds. Jack Dawson from the lower decks of steerage, and Rose DeWitt Bukater from the upper decks and opulence of first class.
When we first meet her, there's this wedding being planned around her, and it's like a death trap to her. There's really nothing that she can do about it. She wants to explore and adventure the world, and she just knows that that's not going to happen.
Don't do it.
Stay back! Don't come any closer!
I think that he recognizes her situation, and he sees how they could definitely have a deeper connection than anything she's ever had before in her life.
If you care about people and you care about these characters, then you can appreciate the tragedy at a microcosmic level.
I'm Jack Dawson.
Rose DeWitt Bukater.
I have to get you to write that one down.
They would provide an emotional doorway for the audience to appreciate the true tragedy of what happened to Titanic.
The Titanic, so overshadowed by the disaster, one doesn't tend to think about what were the 4 days before the ship hit that iceberg.
This calm before the storm is a time when Jack and Rose introduce us to life on the Titanic, from the realm of the lower decks to the refined domain of high society.
You can't tell the story of Titanic without telling the story of the American upper class.
There's the Countess of Roths. And, that's John Jacob Astor, the richest man on the ship.
Titanic's illustrious passenger list includes hotel financier John Jacob Astor, Scotland's Countess of Roths, mining millionairess Molly Brown, Colonel Archibald Gracie, Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon, and his wife, Lucille.
You could just walk around the dining table and you could tell who the people were in almost every instance without even being told. There was an effort on Jim's part to make these people look the way their photographs look. He cast people based upon their appearance.
He's never been introduced to Benjamin Guggenheim, Madame Aubert.
Cameron places countless other historical characters in his story. Titanic's designer, Thomas Andrews, the managing director of the White Star Line, Bruce Ismay, members of the ship's crew, such as the celebrated captain, Edward J. Smith, and the ship's famous band.
So you want to go to a real party?
The film includes the nameless faces of third-class passengers, hopeful immigrants from around the world. They've left their homes and families in search of prosperity and the promise of a new life. Rich and poor, famous and obscure, the society of an age is embodied in the passengers of the ship.
To comprehend the tragedy of the ship, you had to understand the ship. If you didn't appreciate the ship, you couldn't appreciate the sinking. So you had to appreciate it in the terms, in the subjective terms, that people felt about it before they knew they were on the Titanic.
When we got on, I looked in a great big window into the beautiful dining room, and the silver and the linens, everything was beautiful and new.
Take her to see Mr. Murdoch. Let's stretch her legs.
Yes, sir.
When they decide to really go out into the ocean and really bring up the speed and just pound this Leviathan forward at the fastest it'll go, and you've got hundreds of stokers down below throwing coal into these big furnaces, and the big crankshafts of the engines are turning over, these 4-story high engines. You see it all. You see the guts of the ship. You see the power of it. the satisfaction of the officers who run the ship and their sense of their domination of the elements.
To fully illustrate this sense of power and optimism, Cameron must do more than tell a story with words. He must reveal it with vivid images and reconstruct not only the objects of an era, but suggest the aura of a time. Under the guidance of Titanic's foremost historians, Cameron and his team build more than a movie set. They create a striking duplicate of the ship herself.
The interiors, as with the exteriors, were done with such attention to detail that I can't think of it as a set. To this day, I still call it the Titanic.
From the depths of the sea, the decks of the Titanic come to life once again. The ship's gymnasium appears exactly as it did in 1912. First-class suites once again exude the luster of the Gilded Age, and the grand staircase is transformed into the living color of reality.
Good evening, sir.
To look down that well in the first-class staircase, look up and see the dome, and go down deck after deck and end up on that D-deck landing with that beautiful candelabra.
Care to escort a lady to dinner?
Certainly. It's really, I believe, an unprecedented attention to detail.
Didn't take any liberties at all with the physical design of the ship, and tried to take virtually no liberties with the accepted history.
The historical events that Jack and Rose encounter are authentic, from minor incidents to key moments of significance.
Everything that happens around Jack and Rose is very, very accurate. It was happening at that moment in time to those people in very much that way.
The boats are gone!
They happen to be running through it and seeing it, experiencing it, bouncing off it, and in some cases even affecting it.
Colonel, are there any boats on that side?
No, miss, but there are a couple of boats all the way forward. This way, I'll lead you.
I wove them through the pylons of events that were known to have happened.
Cameron's attention to historical events can be seen even in the smallest of details. The hymn sung at the Sunday morning Mass actually ended with the ironic lyrics, "For those in peril on the sea." When ice fell onto the ship after the impact with the iceberg, steerage passengers were actually seen playing soccer with it. It was common practice for engineers to heat their soup on the steam pipes, as depicted in the movie when Chief Engineer Bell gets the order, It was reported that as the ship was sinking, passengers were actually reprimanded for destroying property.
That's White Star Line property!
Shut up!
Elements of this scene with Jack sneaking onto the first-class deck are based on an actual photo taken aboard the Titanic as she sat in Cherbourg before departing for Queenstown.
Holy Mary, Mother of God.
Father Biles, a Catholic priest traveling second class, did actually lead a large crowd of passengers in prayer on the stern of the ship as it was sinking.
And God shall wipe away all the tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death.
Wherever you see something that is just about the Titanic and not about Jack and Rose, it's accurate. And it's there because it's part of that greater drama.
There were 2.5 hours when all these people could have been saved, and not enough lifeboats. I will never forget that.
All right, let's stoke them right up. We go full ahead.
We are making excellent time.
Excuse me, sir. Another ice warning.
You can't keep us locked in here like animals. The ship's bloody sinking!
A wealth of information exists regarding the physical aspects of Titanic in the era in which she existed. But there are many dramatic events that remain shrouded in mystery.
There always will be stories about the Titanic that are controversial. I don't think you can have a subject that fascinates so many people and not have people debate over things that happened that night, who did what, who behaved how.
The iceberg was sort of shaped like this, okay? And there was maybe a little more of the mass to the right. Something made him decide to go left. You have to go in and do the research and find out what people were doing and saying and thinking and how they were acting, who was a coward, who was heroic, who died nobly.
The challenge for James Cameron and historians is to piece the puzzles together and present the events in the most accurate light possible.
The rockets were brought to the bridge by Quartermaster Rowe, who saw Boat 7 in the water. So how can Boat 7 be being... When you spend 2 years cross-referencing everything that everybody wrote or said about something, You find a lot of conflicting stuff, but you find enough reinforcement of a given thing that you can start to peg it.
But coming to a consensus of what really happened is no easy task. Many of the controversies suggest that someone was lying.
Whether he signals it here or not, later he's got the pedal to the metal.
In this scene, Cameron portrays White Star managing director Bruce Ismay urging Captain Smith to increase Titanic's speed.
So you've not yet lit the last 4 boilers?
No, I don't see the need.
Though both men knew that an ice field lay dead ahead, Ismay still pushed for speed.
What a glorious end to your final crossing if we were to get into New York on Tuesday night and surprise them all. Make the morning papers.
Did Bruce Ismay try to influence Captain Smith? According to maritime law, no persons aboard a vessel have authority over the captain of a ship.
Of course, I'm just a passenger. I leave it to your good offices to decide what's best.
Some say this conversation never took place. But in the Senate hearings following the disaster, first-class passenger Mrs. Elizabeth Lines spoke out.
It was Mr. Ismay who did the talking. I heard, "We will beat the Olympic and get into New York on Tuesday," in those words.
Bruce Ismay's one-word rebuttal would tell another story.
Did you have occasion to consult with the captain about the movement of the ship?
Never.
I'm of the opinion that the meeting between Smith and Ismay in the reception room really did take place. I think it's a very true part of the movie.
But why did Captain Smith buckle under Ismay's pressure? He had been repeatedly warned of the looming ice field ahead.
Oh, not to worry. Quite normal for this time of year.
Perhaps the captain was unconcerned because the bridge didn't receive all the warnings.
There was a very critical one that the wireless officers never even gave to the captain.
The radio room was busy transmitting what were thought to be more important messages, private communications with the ship's paying customers. This scene is portrayed in exclusive footage that did not appear in the final version of Cameron's film.
Wants his private train to meet him.
The scene continues to accurately portray Titanic's wireless operator's response to an ice warning from another ship in the area.
You're joking. Bloody hell. It's that idiot on the Californian. Tell him to shut up.
Arrogant bastard. I try and warn him about the ice and he tells me to shut up.
The rude rebuttal appeared to have worked.
That's it for me. I'm shutting down.
The warnings went unheeded, and the rest is history. One of the most disputed events reported about the sinking was the manner in which the third-class passengers were treated.
It isn't time to go up to the boats yet. Please stay calm.
There were certainly reports by a few surviving steerage people of gates being locked, steel gates. So, yeah, I think it happened.
It was very segregated, and you had your little barriers here and there with the signs that say first-class passengers only beyond this point, and gates and things that were locked because it was the separation between second and third or whatever. And unfortunately, that carried over after the ship hit the iceberg.
They tried to keep us down our steerage deck. They didn't want us to go up to the first-class place at all. There was one steerage passenger, and just as he was going into a little gate, a fella came along and shoved him back down into the steerage place. Daniel Buckley, third-class passenger.
For years, these voices from the third class were ignored. But why?
There was such respect for people of the upper classes that if you had a choice between getting a steerage passenger to testify or a ship's officer or a first-class passenger, you're going to go with the first-class passenger or the ship's officer.
If anybody survived who was responsible for the trapping of people below, they certainly never said anything.
Get back! Get back! That's it! Get back! Lock the gates! Get them back from those gates! Don't touch the gates! For God's sake, man, there are women and children down here! Let us up so we can have a chance!
The degree to which passengers were trapped below will always remain a mystery.
Stay back, you lot! Just stay back! Stay back!
Almost immediately after the sinking, rumors began to circulate that officers were shooting passengers as they rushed the lifeboats.
Or I'll shoot you all like dogs. Keep order here.
Second Officer Lightoller attempted to squelch the accusations.
Slow.
On this boat.
Several of the officers used their guns, even if, say, Lightoller maybe lied a little bit about it at the inquiry. Lightoller testified that he didn't use his, but he admitted privately that he did. The incidents where you see guns fired in the movie are all accurate, but whether people stood in the line of those bullets or not, I can't say that that happened or not.
I'll shoot every one of you!
Cameron's movie does show people getting shot, and new information helps to support his portrayal in the film. 2 days after the movie was released, a letter which has never been published in English surfaced. It was written by a steerage passenger, a Norwegian survivor of the tragedy.
You do become serious when you see something so terrible. It seems to me I can still hear the cries for help. And some were shocked when they wanted to crowd their way up into the boats. Carl Albert Mittsjö, April 19th, 1912.
But why did anyone have to die? If there had been enough lifeboats, would the death toll have been so high?
Forgive me, but it seems that there are not enough for everyone aboard.
About half, actually.
You didn't have to have more than 16 lifeboats on any liner, and the Titanic had 20, and so she met the law. And being an unsinkable ship, they never thought they would need them, you know.
But this ship can't sink.
Who would have thought the Titanic would sink? You know, today we have hindsight. We can look back and say, well, yeah, unsinkable ships do sink. In 1912, it never, ever occurred to them that the Titanic would go out in the middle of the ocean and have to leave all her passengers there in little boats.
Of course, the first lifeboats were not filled at all.
Why are the boats being launched half full? Not now, Miss Randall. There, look. 20 or so in a boat built for 65, and I saw one boat with only 12. 12!
The women all said, well, we're not going to go out there and float around the ocean. We'd rather stay on a boat that's safe.
At one point, Captain Smith calls the lifeboats back so they can be filled to capacity.
Lifeboat number 6, come back to the ship. This is the captain.
This scene was shot but not included in the final version of the film.
Come back! Come back to the ship!
Stop! We have to go back!
No. The suction will pull us down if we don't keep going.
Come back to the ship!
Molly Brown was willing to go back. When the ship went down, she was willing to go back to where all these people were, you know, screaming and everything, but Quartermaster Hitchens talked her and the other ladies out of it. And, you know, what could they do?
We've lots more room. I say we go back.
No! It's our lives now, not theirs.
Not one of the half-filled lifeboats responded to the captain's command.
The fools.
Captain Smith knew there was no hope left. He was last seen on the bridge of the ship.
I don't know what happened to the captain. Nobody does. If you went to the wheelhouse, what we show in the film is probably what happened to him. But it could have been anything.
His body was never recovered.
They were sending up rockets for help. Yes, I remember that very plainly. We saw these people, these 1,500 or 1,700 people jumping from the decks and screaming and yelling for help. And we couldn't help them.
You don't understand. If we go back, they'll swamp the boat. They'll pull us right down, I'm telling you.
And we're recreating something that must have been incredibly horrific for those people to go through. And in fact, most of them died.
Since 1912, one of the most perplexing controversies surrounding the Titanic revolves around her final moments. In order to portray them accurately, Cameron has to know precisely what happened.
I saw the horror of that ship, and I maintained from that night until this day that that ship broke in half as it sank. I am convinced of it. I know it's true.
Second Officer Charles Lightoller gives a different account at the investigation in New York.
Was the vessel broken in two in any manner or intact?
Absolutely intact.
On the decks?
Intact, sir.
When the ship broke in half, of course it broke in half between the four funnels. The stern stayed up for about a minute or so, and then it went down. That's the way we saw it.
First Class Passenger Colonel Archibald Gracie also reports to the inquiry.
The Titanic's decks were intact at the time she sank, and when I sank with her, there was no indication then of any impending break of the deck or ship.
You start to realize that history is really just a kind of consensus hallucination. It's really what the people who survived said happened.
The accounts given by officers and upper-class passengers became accepted as fact. It's their version of events that earlier films about the Titanic portray.
What have we really seen that's indelible in our minds? We've seen the ship kind of at an angle, going down into the water, blazing with light against the starry sky, and there's a stateliness to the way we perceive the sinking of the Titanic. It was not stately. If you were on the ship, it was a rocket sled of a ride. It was a roller coaster.
In 1985, any doubts about how the ship went down are laid to rest. Dr. Robert Ballard discovers the wreck and mesmerizes the world with the first images of the Titanic since 1912. These eerie scenes, filmed by Ballard from his sub, serve as a fresh reminder of the awful tragedy. Ballard also discovers that the Titanic's bow is separated from the stern by almost half a mile, with a debris field in between them. The controversy of whether or not the Titanic split apart is finally put to rest.
You've got the wreck, we know what it looks like, we've been there, we photographed it, and we've got what people said they saw as it sank. And I drew lines between those two things, and that's what the film represents. I've tried to account for it in the way we've done our computer simulation within the film, and then the way we actually show the ship going down. I believe the point at which the ship would have broken was the point at which it was at its maximum height out of the water.
So now as the bow goes down, the stern rises up. Slow at first and faster until finally she's got her whole ass is sticking up in the air. And that's a big ass. We're talking 20, 30,000 tons, okay? And the hull's not designed to deal with that pressure. So what happens? She splits right down to the keel, and the stern falls back level. Then as the bow sinks, it pulls the stern vertical and then finally detaches. Now the stern section just kind of bobs there like a cork for a couple of minutes.
Floods and just goes vertically straight down into the water. It was described as an elevator ride by the baker. He had climbed to the very aft rail right up by the flagpole and was sitting up in the air 150 feet and wrote it down and said it felt like an elevator. If you were a third-class steerage male, you stood about a 1 in 10 chance of surviving.
Come on, lads, step lively.
Nobody from the engine room survived.
Just stay back! Stay back, the lot of you! Just stay back!
These people were doomed. They knew it.
The only way to express the true horror of those awful moments is to put real people aboard a ship and film the scenes exactly as they happened 85 years ago.
We realized, my God, we're going to have to build a big chunk of this ship to really pull off this story in its scope, the way it's been written, and to do it in a satisfying way that's significantly beyond what's been done before. Because if you're not really breaking new ground, what's the point?
The largest single movie set ever constructed for a film takes shape. It becomes the stage for a powerful human drama.
Our characters also are in the height of the action as the ship goes down, so we get to experience what really happened. We stay on the ship to the final throes of the sinking.
We wanted to convey some sense of the rapid destruction to the interior of the ship that would have happened when it really took its final plunge. The pressure differentials built up very rapidly, and the water came blasting in the windows and in through the glass dome. I wanted it to be more visceral, more primal, and quite frankly, to be more terrifying.
thing started to tilt and you just see thousands of people clinging on for dear life and people flying to the left and right of you. Seeing people falling from the tilted ship just like little ants just took me right there.
At one point I put my hands like this so that I couldn't see all that technical stuff, and it looked so damn real.
I just asked myself, how did I get here? To be there in those situations to actually see what it felt like.
Just terrible, and it would have been like that. Really, really horrific.
I don't think you can do a movie about the Titanic without making the sinking what it was. It's really more psychologically terrifying because when you're in a film, you project yourself into that place with those people, and it's just not a place you want to be.
When the Titanic went down, those left on her decks were plunged into the freezing 28-degree water. Most of them did not drown. They froze to death. Fifth Officer Lowe reported that there were so many bodies floating on the surface that he could not row through them. Among the dead were Isidore and Ida Strauss.
Get into the boat. No!
Mrs. Strauss refused the refuge of the lifeboats to meet her fate with her husband. John Jacob Astor. His badly crushed body was recovered a week later by a passing ship. Benjamin Guggenheim.
These are for you, Mr. Guggenheim. No, thank you. We have dressed in our best and are prepared to go down as gentlemen.
He maintained his dignity to the very end. Thomas Andrews. He was last seen in a state of shock as the ship he designed sank underneath him. And Titanic's band. They played on until the final moments. None of them survived.
Gentlemen, it has been a privilege playing with you tonight.
1,502 people were lost. Many of the survivors suffered losses that would affect them for the rest of their lives.
My father, he put my mother and I into a lifeboat. And he stood back and he helped other people into the boat. I didn't make any attempt to get in himself at all. He never even tried. This boat was lowered away with me beginning to scream because I realized my father was not with me.
The last thing that my father said to me, it seems more dangerous for you to get onto that boat than to stay here with me. But after that, he lost his life, and we continued to live.
It was going down a little, just slowly, not fast at all. And the night was dark, no moon, a very dark black night. And that boat was just beautiful. All the lights in the boat were on. It's just a beautiful sight. But it was going down quietly and the lights were going under the water as it went down. And I remember that very plainly. Yes, that was a beautiful sight. And a terrible sight because we could see that the boat was going under the water.
And I was petrified and I couldn't take my eyes off it. And I really mean that.
But the great Titanic was then a broken ship. So it was a terrible moment for everybody to face.
We couldn't help anybody. We had 65 or 70 in our boat. We couldn't help any, and it was standing room only. And we couldn't take another soul in our boat, so we rowed away as fast as we could.
You know, 1912 is a very interesting time. In the first decade of this century, there was a rapid, explosive growth in science and technology, unlike anything that had been experienced before.
It was bigger, better, conquering nature. There was no end to what man could do. If we just put our little noggins in gear, we could conquer anything.
And everyone started to get a real ego about it, when they could actually make things that were larger than life and actually claim that something was unsinkable.
And the sense was that everything was only going to get better and better and nicer and nicer. And what was in store for people beyond that first decade? 2 world wars, nuclear weapons, all of the many problems that we live with, all of which are the fallout of the technological revolution of the 20th century. So the Titanic is this wonderful metaphor for that.
In many ways, the wreck of the Titanic was a wake-up call for the 20th century. Man was dealt a harsh reminder that he was not the most powerful force in the universe.
Nature is never going to be dominated. We're a part of it and we've got to ride with it, figure it out. But we're not going to just kind of steamroll right over the top of it. And that's what they thought they could do in those days. They thought they could pave the world. They thought they could drive their big metal ships across the ocean with impunity. And it just isn't that way.
In filming Titanic, James Cameron did more than recreate a tragedy. He brought the past to life.
To me, the movie is like a time capsule. It has captured 1912 and what it was like to be on board an ocean liner at that time. It is a time capsule that is opened up for all of us to see.
She was a beautiful ship. She looked so lovely. That's how we ought to remember her.